The arrogance of men is thinking movies are in our control and not the other way around. Let's talk about Godzilla 2014.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, it's Monday, so you already know what today's series is about. But if you don't know and you're new to this channel, Daniel will explain what we're going to be discussing or debating.
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week we are talking about 2014's Godzilla, which kicked off the Monsterverse that as of today has 5 movies, and with another one coming out next year. I've seen Godzilla 2014 a bunch of times, and I think the two of you have just seen it for the first time, right?
I think I have seen it before, but a very long time ago. It was kind of like a fresh watching it this time around.
I don't know if I've seen it before because I think I have, I just didn't remember anything that I watched. So I'm not sure. I'm 50-50 if I watched it before.
Yeah, I first saw it when it came out, and then on and off over the years. In the current continuity that exists, that currently the newest one is Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, came out last year. It's probably my favorite, which is an unpopular opinion, I think. It seems like while it was received well when it came out, at least the sentiment I see a lot is that it's one of the less popular ones in the series, and most people seem to think that the franchise kind of found its footing after a couple of movies. But this is where it kind of started. So to quickly recap, Godzilla 2014 starts off with an American family living in Japan. They work at a nuclear power plant that gets destroyed, at first under mysterious circumstances, and then years later, the surviving members of that family, at least the father, has kind of turned into kind of a conspiracy theorist who is convinced that his wife died essentially for reasons that have been covered up by the company and by the government. And so he's been studying kind of the event unofficially. So he goes into kind of the exclusion zone where this nuclear accident had happened, and his son basically gets called in to fly in to kind of get him back. And that then sets off a sequence of events in which giant monsters emerge from this exclusion zone, which wakes up Godzilla, and then they fight. And we follow a group of humans who are caught up in those events. So what was your takeaway and overall impressions from Godzilla?
So for the first 40 minutes to an hour of this, I was loving it. I thought it was, brilliant. The whole story with Bryan Cranston's character, I think it's Joe, I believe his name is, the scientist. Essentially, his character knew that there was something more to what was going on. And of course, it was being covered up, and, the whole him trying to sort of uncover the mystery and uncover what really happened on that particular day. I thought like it was all very compelling, and it was moving at a really good pace. I thought, the acting was like great in it. The story was like great. I was like really connecting with him as a character, and even his son as well. For that first part of the movie, I was like really vibing with the family dynamic of it. And then they kind of take his character out of the movie for the rest of it, and then it turns into these soldiers trying to trying to contain or trying to kill these monsters. And then that's where I kind of started to lose interest in the movie, and it kind of started becoming a bit, whatever. And then of course you have, the big kaiju fights at the end of the movie as well, which were cool, which were okay, but not really my thing at all when looking at movies. So yeah, I kind of felt like it lost its appeal for me that it had at the start of the movie. As it progressed, and then I slowly just became sort of really disinterested in the movie. As I can't remember his name, Aaron Taylor Johnson's character in this movie, as he became sort of the main focus of it, I was just be like, okay, cool. Not really gelling with his story.
I think I had a good time. I think I did have a good time with this film. It felt like there was a story, and which is strange to say because movies should all have a story, but it felt like it had a story because a lot of these like kaiju movies or just like movies where it's CGI heavy, they kind of forget the story in the CGI, as in like they just concentrate on the CGI and like the just monster action. So I kind of had like the same feeling that I had watching Godzilla minus one was similar to the feeling that I had watching this one, especially when it came to like the whole family theme, and obviously the stories revolving around the families and just having human characters. Like I felt very relatable as well because it had like the reaction of human characters like during the situation that they were in, which was good. So yeah, overall I had a good time. Especially I think one of my favorite things about the film was the way that they portrayed humanity's relationship with nature in terms of them trying to control it and the consequences it had with them trying to control it. So I think the way that was executed, I think it was executed perfectly, because there was even a scene where once someone in the army, I don't know if it was like a lieutenant or something, when the scientist, I don't know if he's a scientist, I'm not too sure, but he suggested that they just let Godzilla do Godzilla and not intervene, so pretty much letting Godzilla be the protector. And then he was like, no, I can't take the risk. That is such a human thing to say. Like the way that these governments operate, I was like, okay, I can believe that. Do you know what I'm saying? So yeah, that scene there for me was like a pinnacle moment. 'Cause I was like, oh, humans are just always gonna be humans, man. Even though I understood where he was coming from, because it is a big risk to take. However, it's like the only like it's not even the only, but it's the best option for you to take. Because I was like, that is actually the best option, because you can clearly see that the guns are not working. So yeah, so it was very like most of the weapons that humanity has isn't gonna work on Godzilla or the monsters. So I was thinking to myself, yeah, just that moment there was one of my favorite moments. But yeah, overall, I think I had a good time.
So one thing that both of you kind of mentioned was that like the role of the human characters, right? And I agree with you, Herbie, that the Bryan Cranston story, right? Joe, the engineer who's obsessed with figuring out what happened in that nuclear power plant where his wife died. That's by far the strongest performance and the most interesting character story, because it's I think the most human, the most emotional, the most grounded. And that kind of leads into this idea that there's kind of two different types of kaiju movies, to the point where they probably should be called different things. They shouldn't all be both called kaiju movies. One of them is human focused and the other is monster focused. This and Pacific Rim and Godzilla Minus One, those are very human focused, right? Where the point is a character's journey in the context of a kaiju attack, right? So it's about survival, it's about figuring out what's going on. It's about deciding how and what to do, right? And then we've got the monster focused ones, which are largely about like from the point of view of the monster, right? So the later movies in the Monsterverse, I think, are much more monster focused, right? Like King of the Monsters was like this, Godzilla X Kong was like this, where it's from the point of view of the monsters and the humans are kind of backdrops, and they almost feel obligatory, but not really the point of the story, right? So where do you fall on that? Like, which of those two do you like? Do you find more interesting, and why?
On my experience with the kaiju movies, the one that I've always enjoyed most were the ones that had the human story to it. So this one, for example, again, Joe, the scientist character in this, really kind of resonated with me. And then, of course, Godzilla Minus One, which you can check out one of our earliest reviews that we did, was
The
ones that
first
we
one, in
had.
fact.
The
And
first, the
we
first
already
review that we actually
apologize
did.
for the quality of that one.
Yeah, but that one, I think we all had really high praise for that movie in terms of the characters and the story it was trying to tell, and the different perspectives that were being framed in that story. I feel like you're able, on my side anyways, because when it comes to the kaiju, big fights and stuff like that, it's never really my thing. And that's not anything against kaiju monsters and Godzilla, etc. Even in action movies, if it's all action, it's not really for me unless it's John Wick and it's done excellently well. But just to get back to the point, I always lean more towards story in movies. I lean more towards stories, more into character development, complex issues that are being dealt with in movies. And I feel like the human focused ones are the ones that have that element to it, whether it's done well or not. And I think in this particular movie, it's done well for the first 40 minutes to an hour of the movie, and then everything after that just loses sort of what it had at the start. So more interested in the human element of it and how they react to being in such a situation.
So do you think like that died too soon then? Because it seems like that's where it kind of goes downhill for you.
I feel like they could, if they had a compelling story for his son and his learnings from his dad and his I think his dad went through an experience. I don't think they had like such a strained relationship because he was so obsessed with uncovering the mystery or uncovering what happened to his wife. But if there was something there that you could kind of grab onto, or that I could grab onto and latch onto, then I wouldn't have minded it. But for me, they just replaced a really good character with a pretty generic character in this. And they gave him typical things to do. So like he's on the train and he's becoming like the action hero. I know he was like in the army in this particular movie, but he became the action hero. He had to protect the kid and stuff like that. He joined the army squad and was going out and shooting at monsters and this, that, and the other. And it was just like, okay, like it was a bit all too generic, and there wasn't any depth there, or enough depth there for me in his character.
One thing I will say is I think they killed off the dad a bit too soon, because I think there was a good story there when it comes to the son and the father that I think they could have explored on, especially if he did go back with him wherever the son lived, obviously to his family, because I think there was like a lot of underlying hurt still there that they could have kind of like mended and patched up, because obviously I'm sure, obviously, 15 years later, and obviously the way there was a strain on their relationship due to obviously his father's obsession with trying to find out what actually happened to his wife, as in like why she died and what actually caused it. So I'm sure there was a lot of problems that they could have spoke about, even though it was kind of solved once the son saw that, oh, okay, his dad was telling the truth, yeah. But still, I'm sure that there still could have been a lot of story to that, and it would have been more engaging as well for the audience if it was a two-man journey rather, a father-son journey rather than just the son. So I do hear where you're coming from.
I do think the father dies at exactly the right moment, because he is the man of science, right? He's the engineer. His entire life is managing things that are immensely dangerous, right? He's a nuclear engineer working in a nuclear power plant in Japan, right? His entire life is risk and danger and understanding incredibly dangerous things and using that for the benefit of humanity or society. It is not an accident like that is where he comes from. He dies at exactly the moment where humanity loses control, right? Because until the kaiju show up, humanity, like one thing that really fascinates me about the kaiju genre is this idea that we are no longer at the top of the food chain, right? We live in a world in which every problem can be solved in principle, right? If we just understand it, if we just throw enough smart people and money at it, every problem can be solved. And even if you don't agree with this, on some level, also our entire civilization is built on the idea that this is true. And the kaiju genre asks the question, what if that is no longer the case? What if there's something we cannot control, we can only survive? That is kind of the thing that I'm missing from some of the newer movies in the franchise, where at this point we should have adapted to living in a world in which we are no longer in control, and we just have to kind of adapt to whatever niches the kaiju provide us with, right? And I think the reason why I like this movie so much is that this is the beginning of that. We are seeing the process in which humanity is trying to control this phenomenon, and they are losing, and there is never a point at which they get it back. That's to me the really fascinating thing. Joe's character journey and his story is the process of that. It's the process of humanity losing control. And so it ends exactly when it needs to, in my opinion. The problem is just, and I kind of agree with this, that the son is pretty interesting while he's interacting with the father. And after that, he's a little bit of a cardboard cutout. He becomes kind of a witness, right? He becomes kind of the eyes through which we experience like this kaiju rampage. But that's kind of it. In terms of his character, he's basically generic hero guy, right? Who wants to get back to his family. He's instrumental in solving the problem because he's the only one who can defuse the bomb in the end. And he just saves people along the way, right? Like that's pretty generic stuff. And he's inoffensive and he's effective, but he's also not very interesting. But he never gets to the point where he's actually bad. In the later movies, especially, I think it was Godzilla versus Kong, I think it was, or maybe King of the Monsters, the human characters in that are aggressively aggravating. Like I actively want them to go away and I want them to die because they're just that bad. And if we could just get to the monster fights, then at least that would be entertaining.
Hard to disagree. Again, like you said, he's not terrible in this, but it's just kind of he's just kind of there. One thing I kind of, and I don't know how they would have done it, because you kind of see the theme of family throughout the movie, with Joe and his son, and then even the two kaijus, I don't know what they're officially called in this movie. I can't remember. The MUTOs. You've got the male and the female, and I believe the female's pregnant as well, and there's trying to mate, etc. And I was going to ask actually, how does kind of like the family theme tie into the kaijus in this? I know, like at the most basic sense, it's a man and a woman, and the woman's pregnant, etc. But how do you kind of see the story kind of like elevated by having that same theme of family within the kaijus as well? And what's the movie trying to say basically? It's like, am I missing something where it's relating also family to the kaijus?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like it's an obvious parallel, right? Joe like goes to great lengths to protect and save his family, right? And he fails. Similarly, the male MUTO does the same thing, right? He also tries to protect the female, and he is kind of like his mission is to get the eggs to hatch, right? and he plays a role in that, and so does the female, right, when she builds the nest and guards the eggs and so on, right? If there's anything there at all, I think it's more about this is just a universal of life, and these MUTOs are not simply monsters, they're living beings, and we are just in their way. That's how I would look at that.
Also, I don't think that was supposed to be the main focus. Definitely was one of them, but I think obviously
It's
main...
definitely there, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the MUTOs are not really doing anything evil. They're trying to reproduce, and they're feeding.
yeah,
You know, which is not evil. It's just we happen to be in its way, and we happen to be its food. They're not simply destroying stuff just because, right? They're not really rampaging through a city just because they can. They are seeking out like food and a safe place and so on.
And I think that's where the main focus was when it comes to the kaijus. It was just pretty much trying to show, like, the consequences of humanity, pretty much the consequences of humanity tampering with the natural order. I do agree there was, like, of course, family was a theme in it, but I think that was more from the human perspective. And they just added the whole, kaiju parallel with, we call them MUTOs or whatever they're called, them, being man and woman. They just did that as a little dessert, just to, as a finishing touch to that theme.
I do think it's intentional because
it's intentional.
Because then the third leg of that is Brody, right? Like their family, they are a family, they have a child, they're trying to survive. They both have professions that ultimately are about serving others, right? He's a soldier, she's a nurse. Like these are all like social professions, right? Like with a social function. This is definitely in the DNA of the movie. I'm just not sure it gets to a point where it says very much other than life happens and people will try to, do what they need to live and to survive. And the military is kind of the same way. We spend a lot of time on the aircraft carrier and with the admiral and with the different soldiers and with they make their plans. And that's basically just like kind of doing the same thing, right? Like they are attacking the threat in order to protect the thing that they care about. Right? It's like on a very basic and high level, it's the same thing. And so everybody in this movie, like, and the monarch people are the only exception because they are just there to study the kaiju. And there's nothing, like, they don't really do anything else. And they're just really just there to drop some exposition. But that's about it. And so they are the only ones who don't fit this template, I don't think. It doesn't really make a big point. It doesn't really have a big statement about life. It's more like, this is what existence is. Right? Like on a very primal level, this is what being alive boils down to. And the kaiju are kind of like doing the same thing we are, just on a bigger scale, and there's no negotiating with them.
And I think as well, what kind of ties into that and supports it as well is that there isn't really a villain in this movie at all. Like you said, everything in this movie is the natural order. And again, what some of the later movies tend to do, and sort of a lot of modern movies tend to do, is there's an example of this in like WandaVision, for example. And I don't know how many people watched WandaVision, but you have like the Sword Agency, and they purposely make the head of Sword bad, just to kind of offset what Wanda was doing in that series, essentially. But in this, they could have easily tried to make the military, that obnoxious character, like in sort of Venom 3, where the military is purposely kind of going against everyone, trying to do the negative thing, and purposely being sort of shown to be in a bad light. Whereas in this movie, everyone is doing what they kind of naturally would be doing. Like you said, the scientists are being scientists. The military are trying to protect in the best way that they know how to. The monsters are just doing what they know as well, and everyone's just trying to survive, and no one's purposely just being bad. And not to say that there isn't any bad characters in real life or whatever, but it just kind of ties into the theme of, things are just in its natural order, and people are behaving in their natural ways, and there's nothing that's forced, there's nothing coerced, there's no, trying to push anything. It's just, this is how things are, and this is how things would play out in this particular situation, essentially. So that's another thing I think the movie does really well.
And that's what it feels like to not be at the top of the food chain anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? This is what life feels like when you're not untouchable, which is kind of our experience, right? One other, like, as you were saying this, one thing that popped into my mind is that normally movies like this would blame nuclear weapons, that these kaiju were created or made worse by the nuclear weapons, and that it is our fault, essentially, because we couldn't help ourselves but build nuclear weapons and test them and use them. And here, it's very different, right? Here they are saying the Earth used to be more radioactive, and then as that subsided, the kaiju could no longer exist on the surface, and so they went dormant and underground. And then when we invented nuclear power, they kind of came back, and then we used nuclear bombs to try to kill them, not because like that didn't create the monster. We just used nuclear bombs because those were our biggest guns, and it turns out they fed on the radiation, right? But originally, Godzilla is a Japanese processing of the experience of being on the receiving end of a nuclear bomb, right? Like that's something like you cannot understand kaiju movies without that perspective. And it's been 80 years and it's evolved since then, but that's where it came from, right? And now a movie comes along and basically says, no, this was always going to happen. We were always going to invent nuclear power, and that was always going to wake up the kaiju. And we made it worse by trying to nuke them, but that didn't cause the problem. That is something that I didn't pick up on my first watch or two, but that kind of really jumped out at me this time. And that's kind of interesting, right? You would not expect a movie to take that stance necessarily.
No, you wouldn't. And it kind of almost feeds into the Oppenheimer thing where, like you said, these things were always going to be created, and once they're created, they're always going to be used, essentially. And it's almost like a metaphor for that, is that naturally we, in the story is that, naturally, like you said, naturally we were going to create, nuclear power plants and eventually, nuclear bombs. And then what comes at the end of that? And it's almost like the kaijus are almost like the metaphor for the disaster that then follows of having the nuclear weapon, without explicitly blaming, nuclear weapons in this particular movie. But it's just almost like a parallel of, the Oppenheimer thing, where you think you're doing good, you think you're advancing technology and science and any other by creating a nuclear weapon. Like it's not done so in this movie, but almost like the metaphor of this is then what comes with it, and the devastation and destruction to cities across the world. So yeah, that's just like a small parallel that I kind of wanted to put out there.
I'm just trying to not even piece together what you said, because what you said was clear, but the nuclear weapons was, so what I'm about to say, I might have took what you said a bit wrong, but the nuclear weapons were still kind of portrayed in a negative way, though.
So what they said was all the nuclear bomb, like the nuclear tests in the 50s, were attempts to kill the kaiju, but like they were covered up, and the USSR and the USA said these were tests, but really they were attempts to kill the kaiju. So the nuclear weapons did not cause the kaiju; they did not create them. They didn't really make it worse, right? Like they are kind of woken up by nuclear power plants existing and like radioactive waste existing. But that's kind of like a side effect. That's like ants showing up at your picnic, right? You didn't cause the ants, right? But a lot of other kaiju movies will do this, where they will say, we caused our own demise because we made these bombs. That's just interesting. I don't know of any other kaiju movie. I think Godzilla Minus One completely sidesteps it, right? I don't remember now, but I think Godzilla was made bigger in that one by the bombs or something. But it wasn't directly tied to the use of nuclear weapons, I don't think. So even though in the story it was very recent, right? This was just after the end of World War II in Japan, so this should be like fresh in people's memories. But I don't think they make an explicit connection, because that's not the point of the movie as the authors want to make it. But I think it's notable, right, that this kind of breaks with the tradition a little bit, and basically just is a lot more pro-nuclear power. Like the nuclear power plant is like it's portrayed as being run in like a professional and safe way, right? Like it's not their fault that the MUTO shows up and just breaks everything, right? They have their safety protocols, and the only reason it goes wrong is because nobody could have expected like a giant cockroach, right, to just eat power plant, right? Like Joe orders the shutdown at the first opportunity. Like there's no shifty guy in a suit saying no, keep it going. Won't anybody think of the shareholders, right? Like there's no scene like this. Everybody is professional and safety oriented and does their best. It's an out of context problem, and as a result, they lose. So I think that's just an interesting angle to this that I don't think I've seen very much talked about. So one other thing that I think is really important in kaiju movies is scale. The idea that it has to be big. This movie is full of those scenes, right? So there's lots of scenes where we see things like, I think because we're following human characters and we don't have like this omniscient CGI camera that just captures the entire city, and where the sense of scale can be lost a bit. This one is almost always on ground level. We are always seeing it through the eyes of regular people. And I think that that's something this movie does really well. Like it starts off when they see the kind of the MUTO hatching in the power plant, and there's like workers at the bottom of the screen, and they're like this big on the screen, right? And there's a giant MUTO in the background, and then the devastation starts. I think that movie does that really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think they definitely, when it comes to like building scale, they definitely aced that one. You never see like Godzilla, or you never see like the MUTOs in full view. It gradually builds up. Like it'll show you bits of it. It'll show you like the head. It'll show you like the legs. Same with Godzilla, right? Like it'll build up to the full view, which obviously builds like the suspense, and then and it kind of gives you like that type of feeling when you finally see Godzilla and you finally see the Muto. Is it Mutos, whatever they're called? When
Yeah.
you finally see the Mutos in full action near the end. But I think like people were complaining that there wasn't enough screen time on Godzilla. I think that's what some people found a bit annoying. But for me, I kind of found it. I think it worked well. It worked well because it built the suspense. You know what I'm saying? Like whenever they were shown on screen, it was necessary for the scene and it added to the scene. Especially when you said like you kept on seeing like the human perspective, right? And the human perspective, a lot of the time you can't see. If something that big, you won't be able to see all of it. So I think that's what they did. They executed well. It was like as a human, you're not supposed to see all of it. So that's what made it more relatable and just more engaging, and I just felt the suspense whenever they were on screen.
And it's almost like they're making fun of the audience, because there's even a scene where I think it's where Ellie is in a fallout shelter. I think that's her. And she kind of runs into the fallout shelter, and you kind of see the doors closing, and the Muto and Godzilla kind of smash into each other, and right before they hit, the door closes, and the scene's over. It's almost like they're making fun of people who complain about not enough Godzilla in my Godzilla movie. But yeah, I think we do see quite a bit of Godzilla, but it's not like here's like 20 minutes of Godzilla smashing things, right? It's always like short bursts, and then we switch back to our character. And I think like that's my preferred way of doing a kaiju movie. Like I care about, like, I liked, what was it, King of the Monsters, which is basically just Godzilla fighting other monsters, and that's fun. And also, what is it called, Sky Island? Not my favorite movie. Characters are pretty awful, but it's basically just a theme park ride of here's a cool monster, here's a cool monster, here's a cool location, right? I can get on board with that kind of movie, but the ones that really get to me, the ones that I'm really interested in and that I find interesting to rewatch, are the ones where we see the impact of kaiju existing on people. They don't even need any special personalities or character arcs. Like, how interesting are characters in disaster movies, right? Somebody trying to survive an earthquake, or like a hurricane or something. They're pretty average people most of the time, but it's about selling us on the desperation and on the fear of not seeing your family again. And there's these scenes in these stadiums converted into FEMA camps and stuff like that. It looks like a disaster movie for a lot of the time, right?
Speaking on the scale and the size of the kaijus in this, one scene where I kind of felt the dread for the characters was when they were on the naval boats or the ships, and you could see Godzilla approaching them, and it's like at any other given point you'd feel so comfortable with what you have on the boat, the size of it, the weapons that you have on it, etc. But you can have all of that, and then what do you do when you see Godzilla literally just swimming at you, and you can see I don't know what they are, the spikes or its shell or whatever it is, just swimming at you, and you're just helpless, like you can't do anything but just stand there. So I think that was one part that the movie did really well, is just making me feel the dread for the characters, making me feel like, damn, there's literally nothing you can do in this situation.
That's got a lot to do with the cinematography as well, though, because that scene was also a highlight for me as well. The way, like, I wasn't expecting because I didn't know what was going to happen when he was approaching. So the fact that he just went underneath the boat, I was like, it told me a lot. It told me that he's not a threat number one. He doesn't even care about them. That's how it shows how little humans are when it comes, you know what I'm saying, when it just comes to, like, you keep referring to Daniel, like, the food chain. It shows, that scene there showed that, okay, he's number one, and we are, like, no, I think he's number one, and we are way below him. And I think for the humans, they realize, damn, we've got no control over what the hell's going on. We've lost control of nature. That scene there was pinnacle for that. But yeah, so I think the cinematography there had a lot to do with kind of like feeling that dread that you were mentioning.
When Godzilla destroys stuff, it's never with malice, right? It's always a side effect. Like, there's a point where he comes back to the surface just a little bit too early, and so he just sinks a ship. So he doesn't even notice.
Yeah.
Like, to us, it's this massive thing, and he barely notices. Like, there's like a bunch of different like little set pieces here that, like, to me, a movie like this, like, one of the things I look for in a movie is creativity, right? Where I say, oh, that's cool. And I've got a whole list of them here, right? So the Mute was sitting on the power plant. It's like the first time, it's like your first oh shit moment, right? Where you just realize, okay, this is not just a large animal, this is something else. MUTOs building a nest in a city. It's pretty cool. and with the male Mewtwo sitting like on a skyscraper, like a bird sitting on a tree or something. The halo jump is pretty amazing too.
Remind me.
So in San Francisco, when Godzilla and the Mewtwo's fight, they've basically devastated the city, and so they need to either defuse or extract the nuke because they realize if it goes off where it is, 100,000 people will die because they weren't able to place it where they wanted to. They wanted to place it off the coast and then lure them there, and then that didn't go well. And so now there's a nuke in the middle of San Francisco. There's 100,000 people in the blast radius. And so they do this halo jump, right? So they had a high altitude, low opening where they jump out of the plane, and they have, I'm not entirely sure what the reason is. It can't just be that it looks cool, but they have these red smoke grenades tied to their ankles. And so like the entire squad leaves behind this red trail that slowly descends from the sky into this cloud of ashes. And it looks incredibly cool. And they kind of fall past Godzilla, and like there's like these first-person shots where they kind of just fall past Mewtwo's fighting. That really communicates scale. And it also looks incredibly cool because you've got kind of this dusky situation because there's so much dust in the air. The entire city has been devastated, and there's just these little red trails of color that indicate this is like humans. And you can barely see them on the screen. It looks incredibly cool.
For you, was that like your most iconic moment when it comes to just the film? Because for me, when we're talking about the kaiju, I think for me, so I'm not gonna kind of like derail from what you're saying, but for me, I think the favorite kaiju moment was when the introduction to Godzilla, when he was just screaming. That scene there, though it was generic and it's expected, it's just that's the first time you see Godzilla. Like, you don't see his whole body, but you see like, you know, his top half, and the way that he just went quiet, and then it was just piercing, but it was like that nice type of piercing, low key like ASMR, but it was just piercing, bro. I was thinking, flipping out.
The sound in this is awesome. You can just imagine what that's like in a proper cinema setup.
Yeah,
like my little sound bar already kind of was stretched to its limits. I kind of had to buy some ice cream afterwards to apologize. But like in a proper cinema, this must be pretty impressive. And they just used that sound to kind of convey like the bigness of it.
They got the tone right in this film.
Yeah, and it's like there's other scenes too, like when the Muto flies for the first time. It's kind of this is not going the way we would like.
Yeah. I mean, that movie was funny. Yeah, the way you said that was funny because that's what, even when it flying out, even when I saw it flying, I was like, damn, it just couldn't get any worse than that.
I think the movie has a whole bunch of little scenes like this, right? That I'm kind of missing from something like Godzilla X Kong, where I say, oh, that's really cool. Somebody really sat down and said, okay, what can we put in, not just to convey the core ideas, like how big these things are and how dangerous they are and how powerless we are against them, but also just for the viewers to go, oh, that's cool. That is something I want out of a kaiju movie. You can't just do that for 2 hours. There has to be other stuff too. But I think like a certain amount of it, that's one of the criteria for this is job well done. That's just missing from so many in recent years, and this one just did it 5-6 times, maybe, depending on how you count. Another one where these two soldiers are kind of trying to sneak past the Muto, and then one of their, like the existence of the Muto triggers kind of interference in the radio, and that draws the attention of the Muto, and that doesn't go well. Or there's another one where Brody tries to get to the boat to get to the nuke. And there's like multiple squads of soldiers just firing at the Muto just to draw its attention, draw it away from the boat. And every time it bites, like just a squad stops firing because it ate them. And there's so many little touches in this. I'm not saying it's the best kaiju movie ever, but it's like I've tried a bunch of them, and like this is like top 3 easily because of just moments like this that really like other one like I'm absolutely crazy about Pacific Rim that has a bunch of stuff like that in there too. Cloverfield is another one. It just really needs to kind of convey like what it's like to be a human being in that kind of situation.
I definitely do hear what you're saying. I can't really name a bunch of kaiju movies on the top of my head. I'm sure I've seen a lot, I just don't remember. As in like I don't remember the names of it. But I do hear where you're coming from. It's just very hard to comment on your point because I don't. Like, you would have to mention a kaiju movie for me to be like, oh yeah, I remember that one and I watched it. So I can't really comment on your point, but I understand your point.
It's more you notice when a movie doesn't do this. I was absolutely like losing faith in humanity because people liked Godzilla X Kong so much. And for me, that is like an example of doing it wrong. It's just 2 hours of big monsters fighting, and very little creativity, very few memorable moments. And, not just to dunk on that movie, and if anybody likes that movie, good for you. It's more like the stuff that I'm looking for in a kaiju movie that makes kaiju movies interesting. This one, Godzilla 2014, has them, and so many newer ones don't. Because I think it's just about big monsters smashing things. But like there's like a human element that has to be there too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the human element. Definitely, they locked that down.
Any other thoughts on Godzilla?
I think I've kind of said my piece when it comes to the film. I had a good time with it. I kind of had a similar feeling with watching Godzilla Minus One, like I said, because of just the whole human perspective and the reaction towards it. So it felt more real in such a, fictional world, fantasy world. So I think they definitely managed to do that really well. So overall, I had a good experience.
I know I kind of, say that I fell off in the second half of the movie, but that's
You said
more.
it was rubbish. No, I'm joking.
No, that was more story wise in the second half. But it was honestly, it was such a strong start to the movie. I was like so invested in Joe's story at the start of the movie, and then like you said, it's really creative. It's got like so many cool moments. It makes you definitely feel the dread and the fear that you would have being one of those people in those settings. It definitely does. It does fall into the traps of having some generic moments and some generic hero moments for Joe's son in this movie. But outside of that, I think everything else is excellently done. Especially comparing it to other kaiju movies, I definitely hold this in higher regard to others. Maybe not to doesn't reach Godzilla minus one for me, but it's still a very strong outing.
Yeah, and one thing this movie kind of reminded me of is how mad I am at the Monarch show. So Apple Plus put out a Monarch show. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh yeah, sorry, I gave up after the episode.
I checked out after like episode 3.
Oh, you made it about 3 times as far as I did. So I watched the first episode, realized what it was about, realized that what people had been saying was true, which is that they put in just enough kaiju stuff to kind of string you along, and then they put in some generic family drama that I have zero interest in, and so I didn't watch past the first episode. I just really want to see a show about Monarch, like what it's like. These movies often focus on the military or on people trying to survive or trying to defeat the kaiju in some way, and I want to see the people who want to study them, the people who are tasked with the idea of we tried to kill them and we can't. So now we either die out or we adapt. And Monarch is charged with helping us adapt, figuring out what needs to be done in order to adapt. I want to see a show about those people, right? Kaiju are a fact of life. They're not a threat. Like they are a threat, but they're not something we fight. They are something we adapt to, like in a way that allows as many people as possible to live his life as good as possible. I really want to see that show, and I'm a little bit angry that we didn't get that, even though we were promised it. It should be something like in the vein of kind of following on from this movie. The movies after this didn't really craft a world that feels really real, like that really feels like, yes, people have been enduring this for a decade, and it should have changed everything. Human society should have adapted, and we're kind of seeing the beginnings of that here. And I want to see a show in which that happens, or a movie, like a series of movies in which this happens. But a show would allow it to be more episodic and focus on more different people and go into more detail. So that's what I want to see, and I've not found this so far. Like there's a whole bunch of different Godzilla and other kaiju stuff. Some of it on Netflix. Like there's a bunch of animated shows on Netflix that kind of tie into this, and it's not what I want. But I feel like the first half of this promises me something that we've never gotten, and that's a bit of a shame. And I don't know that we can ever go back. It doesn't seem like we're ever going to get that. So I'm a little bit upset about that. But yeah, like that's that. Like at least with this movie,
Let's just rely on the Japanese, man. Hopefully they'll release something which.
yeah, like, I've seen a few Japanese kaiju movies, and none of them have quite resonated with me. I still want to watch Shin Godzilla, which is essentially from the point of view of the scientists and the government. And it's more of a parody about how dysfunctional the Japanese government is, as opposed to anything else. It's lots of people in boardrooms putting together PowerPoint presentations about how to respond to the crisis. It's that kind of thing. But I want it to be like a survivalist, scientific kind of thing. Anyway, shall we wrap it up?
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. It didn't really turn into a debate as I thought it was going to be. More of a discussion.
Thank you for rocking with us today. If you liked everything that we discussed today, tell a friend. And if you hated and you thought we were talking a bunch of rubbish, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. We'll catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye bye.